Snow fell in heavy, sweeping currents that Christmas Eve. But for Eleanor Marsh it was simply the final trial in a life already shaped by hardship. She trudged forward through the knee-high drifts, her patched dress stiff with frost, her thin boots soaked through, praying silently that the man who had written to her, a widowed homesteader named Lucas Hale, would not take one look at her state and turn her away. The Montana frontier was no place for the weak, and Eleanor had been reminded of her weakness all her life. Yet something inside her, some small ember that refused to die, pushed her forward as she approached, the cabin glowing faintly in the darkness, its windows leaking warm gold into the swirling white. At least she would have tried to catch hold of a life she had never known, a life where she was wanted, needed, or at least not treated as a burden. But as she reached the door, her breath ragged and her vision tunneling, she felt the weight of her past pressing against her, the cold orphanage halls, breath, the factory foreman who'd threatened to fire her when she fainted at her station, the people who looked at her patched clothes and saw nothing but a hopeless case, a girl who would never amount to anything. And for a moment she froze there, hand hovering, wondering if she truly dared to knock and risk another disappointment. Before she could decide, the door burst open, warm air spilling out in a wave that nearly sent her to her knees. And there in the doorway stood not the man from the letters, but a little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with wide earnest eyes and curls like dark chocolate, her tiny hands clutching the doorframe. As she stared at the strange woman coated in snow, behind the girl, Eleanor glimpsed the interior of the cabin, its crackling fire, its sturdy wooden table, moving with the wary tension of someone who had forgotten how to expect good news. The girl whispered, "Papa, she's here," as if announcing the arrival of a miracle rather than a stranger in rags. And Eleanor's throat tightened painfully because she remembered the letters Lucas Hale had written, careful, thoughtful, hesitant words from a man who said he did not want a servant, nor a cook, nor a decorative wife chosen for him by neighbors. He simply wanted someone kind, someone steady, someone who wouldn't vanish the way life had taught him. People often did, and now, standing before him, Eleanor felt like the worst kind of imposter. She finally stepped inside, though her legs trembled, and the warmth hit her like a blow, melting the snow on her clothes and revealing every patch, every tear, every sign of the poverty she could not hide. Eleanor instinctively lowered her head, apologizing in a shaking voice for her appearance, for the delay caused by the blizzard, for everything she believed made her inadequate, until the little girl suddenly tugged at her skirt and said, "Papa said you were coming today. I waited for you," as if Eleanor were someone worth waiting for, and that simple sentence nearly broke her. Lucas, still silent, studied her with an expression she could not read. Was it disappointment, surprise, pity? And she braced herself, knowing this was the moment her fate would be decided. But instead of condemnation, Lucas stepped closer, removed his coat, and draped it over her shoulders with careful, steady movements, saying, "Miss Marsh, Eleanor, you're freezing. Sit by the fire. We'll talk after you're warm." And his voice held neither embarrassment nor judgment, but something far gentler, something like recognition. Overwhelmed, Eleanor let them guide her to the hearth, where she sat trembling as heat seeped back into her bones. And while the flames crackled and the storm roared outside, she could feel the weight of Lucas's gaze, not assessing her worth, not measuring her usefulness, but trying to understand her. And she realized with a shock that he hadn't even looked at her bag or her clothes. Instead, he knelt beside his daughter and whispered something that made the child's face brighten. And Eleanor wondered what kind of father he was, what kind of man he was, and whether the letters he wrote from the lonely corners of the frontier had captured even a fraction of his true nature. After a long silence, he finally approached her again, pulling a chair close but not too close, giving her space as though he sensed she wasn't accustomed to kindness. And he said softly, "I didn't send for you because I expected perfection. I sent for you because I believed two broken lives can make something whole." Words no one had ever spoken to her, words that struck deeper than any Christmas hymn drifting through the wind outside. And for the first time that night, Eleanor felt not like a beggar or a burden, but a woman standing at the threshold of a life she might actually deserve, even if she didn't believe it yet. As the fire crackled, As Lucas's daughter leaned her head on Eleanor's knee with childlike trust, and as the storm sealed the cabin from the rest of the world, Eleanor realized the truth of this Christmas Eve. She hadn't simply arrived at a stranger's home. She had stepped into the beginning of a story neither of them knew they were ready for. A story where worth wasn't measured by wealth, beauty, or status, but by the quiet courage to show up even when life had tried to convince you that you had nothing to offer. And though she couldn't yet say the words aloud, deep inside Eleanor felt a fragile hope flicker, tentative but bright, that perhaps this time she wouldn't be turned away. Morning came slowly to the Hawley homestead, with pale winter sunlight seeping through the frost-rimmed window panes, and Eleanor woke to the crackling of firewood and the soft hum of a kettle warming on the stove. For a heartbeat she didn't know where she was, expecting to open her eyes to the cold cot at the boarding house or the drafty hallway of the orphanage. But then she felt the heavy quilt tucked around her and smelled the warm, familiar scent of wood smoke and pine, and the memory of the night before rushed back. Her arrival through the storm, the little girl's trusting eyes, Lucas's coat placed around her shoulders as though she were someone precious. She sat up slowly, startled to find the child curled beside her, fast asleep, with her small hand gripping the sleeve of Eleanor's patched dress as if afraid she might vanish, and the sight nearly undid her. She carefully eased herself out of the bed, wrapping the quilt around the girl to keep her warm, and stepped into the main room where Lucas was bent over the stove, his broad frame silhouetted against the morning light. He turned when he heard her footsteps, offering her a nod and a small, almost shy smile, one that softened the sharpness of his features, and he asked if she slept well, not as a formality, but with genuine concern that made her throat swell. She tried to apologize again for her appearance, for the storm, for not being the kind of bride a man like him deserved, but Lucas raised a hand, stopping her gently, telling her that survival was nothing to be ashamed of, and that rags did not define a woman's worth on his land, and certainly not in his home. And hearing such words spoken with conviction sent a strange warmth through her chest, one she did not yet know how to hold. He poured her a cup of tea, placing it into her hands with a care that felt foreign to her, and explained that he had not chosen to send for a bride because he needed help with chores, no matter what the town gossips claimed, but because raising a daughter alone while carrying the grief of losing his wife had hollowed him in ways solitude could no longer fill, and he wanted companionship built on honesty rather than pretense. Eleanor listened, unsure why her own eyes burned, until he added quietly that his late wife had been ill for years, leaving him with the fear that he had failed as a husband and the terror that he was now failing as a father. And something in his voice, raw, scraped, vulnerable, cut through all the walls she had built over her lifetime, because she understood the feeling of believing oneself inadequate, better than anyone. When Lily, the little girl, finally woke and rushed sleepily toward her father, climbing into his lap and burying her face in his shirt, Eleanor realized that this home, despite its warmth, was built on years of loss and quiet perseverance, and she wondered whether there was truly a place for someone like her within it. But throughout the day, Lucas never once asked her to prove herself, never once looked at her with the calculating gaze she had come to expect from those who measured people only by what they could offer. Instead, he asked about her journey, her interests, her fears, and he listened not like a man assessing the value of livestock, but like someone trying to understand the pieces of a person he hoped to build a life with. And each gentle question both steadied and terrified her, for she had never been the subject of anyone's curiosity before. As the hours passed, Eleanor helped prepare dinner while Lucas chopped firewood with sure and powerful motions outside, and Lily followed her around the kitchen, chattering about her chickens, her drawings, her favorite Christmas story. Yet beneath her growing comfort lurked the gnawing fear that once the initial kindness faded, once the novelty of her presence wore off, Lucas might see the truth of her insignificance, and she carried that fear quietly until evening fell. The storm had passed by then, leaving the world outside covered in untouched blankets of snow that glittered under a moonlit sky. And as Lucas lit the lantern and Lily decorated the small Christmas tree in the corner, Eleanor felt the weight of her uncertainty pressing down on her until Lucas approached her with a small wooden box in his hands, carved with delicate pine branches, something clearly made with care. And he told her softly that he had carved it for her long before she arrived, because he wanted her to know that she had a place here, not as a burden or a duty, but as a woman whose presence mattered. Eleanor stared at him, breath caught, hands trembling, because no one had ever crafted anything for her, and she asked why he believed she was worthy of such effort when he barely knew her. Lucas stepped closer, his voice low and steady, telling her that he saw the strength it took for her to arrive alone in a blizzard, the courage it took to answer a stranger's letters, and the kindness in the way she spoke to his daughter, as though Lily's small heart was something sacred. "Worth isn't measured by the past you survived," he said, "but by the goodness you carried despite it." And in that moment, something inside Eleanor, something long frozen, finally cracked open, releasing years of doubt, fear, and emptiness. Tears spilled from her eyes before she could stop them, and Lucas didn't flinch, didn't turn away, but instead touched her hand with such gentleness that she felt the world tilt, because for the first time someone saw her not as damaged, but as valuable, not as a stray seeking shelter, but as a woman deserving of a future. Eleanor let herself lean into the warmth of it, and something like belonging settled into her bones. Later that night, after Lily was asleep and the fire burned low, Lucas stood beside Eleanor at the doorway where she had first entered, and he told her that he didn't want her to feel obligated or trapped. He wanted her to choose this life, choose him, choose their little family, not out of desperation, but out of desire. The wind whispered softly across the snow. The moon gleamed on the white world outside, and Eleanor realized that this place, this cabin, this man, this child had already begun to feel like home. And with a voice trembling yet certain, she said that she chose them not because she had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time she felt seen, safe, and wanted. Lucas exhaled slowly, relief washing across his face, and when he reached out to take her hand, it felt not like a rescue but a partnership, to broken souls finding strength in each other. And as their fingers intertwined in the quiet warmth of the cabin, Eleanor understood that her arrival in rags had not been the end of her story. It had been the beginning of the life she had always deserved, proving that sometimes the greatest Christmas miracles were not grand gestures but the simple act of being seen for one's true worth. And with that realization, she made a silent vow to herself, to Lucas, and to Lily that she would build a future with them, not out of obligation, but out of love.